And amid all the noise and haste, there are still fragments of silicon.
All right, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon, the Daylight Interviews. Joining us this week is Charles Wolfe of Charles Wolfe Music. Charles, are you there?
I am here. Thank you for having me.
No problem, no problem. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so to elaborate, we usually start with a specific question at the top of our interviews, but I'm not sure if this one really applies because to get into some background information for our listeners, you are a composer of video game music, but you're not a video game music composer, if I have that correct.
Is there a difference? I write music for video games, if that's what you're asking. I am a professional freelance composer.
I suppose I can explain that statement. It's like you write video game music, but you're not somebody who's defined by that. You do, just looking at your web page here, you do like music for podcasts. You do music for comics, apparently.
Yes. Talk more about that.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at here. You do compositions for many different mediums and genres, as opposed to there are people who just do music for the video games. So
right.
I wanted to establish that at the onset. So
exactly. I'm a professional composer. I went to college and got my bachelor's degree in music composition from California State University. A number of years ago, and then I went on and got a master's degree in music theory and music composition from Texas State University, and I graduated in 2013 with that. And then I have worked as a private instructor teaching piano and guitar and how to compose music and theory as a tutor, and I worked for about 5 years doing that, running a studio in North Carolina. And then recently, my wife, who's an engineer, got a job here in Los Alamos, right near Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so we moved from North Carolina to here in New Mexico recently. And when that happened about a year ago, I started working more as a freelance composer and starting to use my training, really, and have over the past year worked on over 18 plus projects, working with a lot of independent developers of various media, a lot of them video games, indie video games, and I've had a great opportunity to do that. But I'm not, as a composer, because writing music is what I've been trained in. Writing music is writing music. So the process, if it's for a podcast or for film or TV or for a game, there are differences, but on the end of the day, it's all just writing music. So I am able to do more than just video games. However, I have done a lot of video games, and I'm excited to talk about that today.
Indeed. And I suppose to start the questioning there is, what was your first video game specific project, and how did that come about?
Absolutely. So back right around the end of 2020, everyone was, of course, stuck at home for obvious reasons. And as I was sort of building up, I knew I wanted to really launch into writing music more professionally. It had been a goal of mine that I'd been building towards and upgrading my system to be able to handle that. And so at the time, I had a 2011 MacBook Air, and it had 4 gigabytes of RAM. And so it could do some music stuff, but if you get to bigger orchestral things, that requires a lot of RAM to do, because you're loading in a lot of instruments and they're high quality samples, so it can quickly overwhelm the system. So I had to be creative. and how I approached early projects because I was slightly limited by the machine I was using. I'm grateful to say I've been able to upgrade quite a bit. I'm now on a Windows computer, and it works so much better. But what I will say is my first project was a friend of mine was taking a class and was doing a sort of a intro to Unity kind of thing. Strong Hearth 45 on Twitter, and she had written this 5-level sort of demo game called Gym Trek, and I was looking for on opportunities just to sort of start writing for a game. So I said, "Hey, can I score your game? And I will help code it, and I'll get a little bit of that experience as well." And I had been learning C# up to the last 3 or 4 months before that, and exploring Unity as well. And so I worked with her, and I scored the first game ever, Gym Trek. It's actually on my website. If you go to, there's a game demo tab. You actually can play that game right now. It's 5 levels, a little platformer, very simple, very geometric, polygon, and it's a lot of fun.
Okay. And did you find, well, you mentioned like music writing is music writing, but did you find composing, like actually creating the instrumentation and all that sort of things, markedly different for video games than other genres?
It just depends on the projects, to be honest. There is overlap for sure. My specialty, I have kind of 2 areas that I work in a lot. I do a lot of retro chiptune style music, so 8-bit, SNES, 16-bit stuff. I also work a lot in full fantasy, orchestral, modern cinematic style. So much more. Yes, there is. I can hear in the background the theme to one of my to Gym Trek playing. But yes, I do a lot more of the modern style as well.
Petty, is that you playing that?
Yep, I just need to turn it down a little bit.
Someone else is playing.
Yes,
that.
it is Petty.
Okay, just making sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. Apologies to. Yeah. We don't usually play music on this program, so apologies if we have a bit of rough blending, so to speak.
Yeah, just yell at me if it's too loud,
Yeah.
I'll fix it.
So, but we do actually want to play your music so people can get an idea of what you've actually created.
Absolutely.
It's just we usually do not broadcast music because we are worried about the copyright bots, both
Of course.
on YouTube and Twitter. But anyway, so as you were saying,
So, it depends on the project. I've worked on a number of different projects at this point. The second game I worked on was a retro platformer roguelike called The Island of Spirits, still in production. It's still being developed by the developer Madox, who's a fantastic pixel artist on Twitter, and check him out. And he has this game, and I've worked with him over the past year developing it. And that is a much more retro style thing versus some of my more recent work, which has been a lot more orchestral.
like, I suppose there's quite a few questions to ask, but
Yeah.
I suppose the first in regards to the Island of Spirits, is this a game in development or is it in early access?
There is a demo out currently that you can check out on Steam, and so people can go and look at it, but it is still under development. There's going to be 3 main areas to the game, and the first one is out, but it's continually being upgraded, and the art is getting better and better, and you can hear that. And it's a really, really cool project, and one that I really enjoyed working on. The thing I find is style, and this is true of when you're working with like short films and stuff as well, when you're working with someone else, you're writing music for a specific purpose and a function. So you're trying to take and give the player an emotional experience. You're trying to have the excitement be there. If it's action adventure, you're trying to make the thoughts that need to be like more sad or more or slower, or maybe a shop tune. You got to kind of create the world and help the world building with the setting that you're building with the music. And so the style is often really determined by the developer. They might have a specific soundtrack that they love. This happens a lot where they'll have other soundtracks that are listening to from other games that inspired their game, and they'll want something that's sort of in that vein, sort of in that style. And I find that's the best way to communicate when working with independent developers who may, not be as musically versed, which is totally fine. I've worked with people from all over the world at this point, and sometimes they don't even speak English. Might be their second or third language. So the best way to communicate about music is with music. So having them send me a few files or a soundtrack or two, and kind of going, this is sort of the vibe we're going for, can really help me quickly zero in on things like you asked earlier, instrumentation, on the texture, sort of the what's the harmonic language like, what's the melody supposed to be like, is it like poppy, is it not, is it orchestral, is it chiptune. I did one game where it was a metal track, that was Pesticide, one of my projects I worked on, and I contributed one or two tracks to that project. A number of composers contributed to that project. That is by a wonderful developer, Modular Squared. He runs a Punk Dev Discord, and you can find him on Twitter. If you're not following him, he's amazing. He retweets so many things. Really supportive of any devs. And it's really cool to be part of all these projects.
Well, that's good to hear. And I suppose in the question of styling, is one more difficult than the other? Like, is it easier to put together a chiptune versus a orchestral-esque soundtrack?
The biggest difference I find is not difficulty, but time. When you're running chiptune music, there's usually about 5 to 10 tracks, instrument tracks that you're writing simultaneously. So you have your drums, you might have like a chord kind of thing, you might have a couple of like lead lines, some melody driving lines, you might have some like other textural elements, some like risers and falls and stuff like that. So that's like the maximum it gets. It only gets so complicated, right? But when you're doing orchestral, on average orchestra, there's 30 instruments in an average orchestra. So that's 30 instrument lanes that you're composing for. So for 1 hour of work, I will get, I would say, twice as far, or maybe more, on a chiptune in the space that it takes me to write a full orchestral piece, because you're having to literally write in and play in, 3 times as much many instruments.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But where I find that basically, and this is simplifying it way too much, but a lot of music comes down to you have your chords, your harmony, and then you're fitting melodies that are going to blend and flow and are going to kind of line up with those chords, and you're going to be hitting notes that are part of those chords in your melody, and you'll have notes that are not part of the chords. You'll kind of blend through. And so the process of writing orchestral for chiptune, in my mind, is very, very similar. Those styles, while they're stylistically different, and that's driven a lot more by the instrumentation maybe than even just the actual like harmonic language I'm using. I don't find, for me, that the way I approach it is that different, other than specifically trying to get certain styles to follow through.
Okay. And I suppose on the orchestral side of the equation, I'm not sure if this is the right word to use, but it probably fits. How authentic is it? Like, or rather, are you working with actual orchestral instruments or, stand-ins?
So how authentic? I try to make the music composition side of it is very authentic. Like, the approach I'm using is an approach used by composers for the last several hundred years. I start on the piano. I will sketch out for one piano, and then I will then sketch out for 2 pianos before I orchestrate. Sometimes I can just jump right into the orchestration, but sometimes I will have to start. Sometimes I will usually start on the piano first and sketch things out, get some ideas, get my main melodies, get my main kind of harmonies, my chords, and figure out sort of what the vibe is. And then from there, once I have that sketched out, and I use a Muse Score, it's a Muse Score 3. It's a free open source notation program. Anyone can download it and play around with it if they want to. And it's a basic, just input notes into a score, and it'll play it back to you using basic MIDI. And then once I have that kind of fleshed out, I'll go into my DAW. I use Cakewalk, open source as well. Anyone can use it. And then from there, I have purchased a number of really high quality orchestral sample libraries. I use a lot of stuff from Spitfire Audio. So I am using sample libraries. I don't have access to a real full orchestra. currently. If certain projects come up and I have the budget for it, I would love to hire a full orchestra, but oftentimes I'm working with independent developers, and so the budget isn't there for hiring a full orchestra because it's, thousands of dollars per hour. So I use orchestral samples, but the realism of it has gotten so good that I think the average person couldn't tell what is real in terms of and what is sort of an orchestral sample. It's very authentic in terms of how it sounds. I think what surprised me was how much I think an assumption I made, and then I was wrong in this, and I had to relearn this, was I thought that all sounds needed to be the most authentic ever, always. And then I asked to do an SNES style, which is pretty much a basic MIDI style, which was orchestral, but it was supposed to be kind of like, sort of a RuneScape sort of vibe. It had to be, early WoW sound. It didn't need to be authentic, like using the best libraries I had. I actually needed to use a much more simple, basic library that was not very authentic because I was trying to capture a very retro sound, a very distinctive sound from a very definite time period. So sometimes the developers are not looking for the most authentic. Sometimes they're looking for something that's authentic to the style of the game.
Makes sense. And for those who might not know, Super NES music is probably the closest I can think of in terms of retro style music that's like what you do with the orchestral stuff, because that's all sample based music.
Right. Right.
And I guess going into the retro style more, have you actually done work in recreating music and sound as it was on, say, a Commodore 64 or an NES or something like that, and within the rules of that system?
I have written several soundtracks, I think 2 that are SNES style. The most recent one was with Space Caterus, is the developer, and he's working on a tactical RPG. It's currently untitled, so I don't have the title for that, but if you follow him on Twitter, you can see the work. And it's a kind of a turn-based, top-down tactical RPG. It's sort of inspired by Fire Emblem, specifically some of the Fire Emblems of the early 90s. And so it has that sort of soundtrack to it. And so the as far as writing music that could be played like on a Commodore 64 or on an SNES system, I haven't gone that far. That's very that gets into like a deep level of coding, and a whole other level that I haven't been asked to go to. It might be interesting at some point to try to do that, but at this point, because we're oftentimes writing modern games using modern systems that are in a retro style, I can use my standard approach and approach the music by writing basically tracks that loop. Oftentimes it'll be anywhere from 30 seconds to 4 minutes long a piece, and it'll play through statically and then start over from the beginning for a lot of, or it'll just be short fragments because there'll be quick cuts from, say, an attack scene like in an SES game to then, okay, now it's your turn. Okay, the music plays while it's your turn, and then when it goes back to the enemy, it's another set of music. So you don't need the music to be going on for minutes and minutes. You only need it to be filling the space for 20 seconds or so. Just depends on the game, exactly how I approach breaking up the individual tracks. Nice thing, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I suppose we could go down to some of these individual games and do a further breakdown. Like one of your more recent projects here is Boulder Mage, a fantasy adventure Metroidvania that was in development in 2021.
Yes, it's still ongoing in development. That's when I started the project, which is why I think I have it listed under that year. That's still under development. That hasn't been released yet. That was in collaboration with Bath Thief. I wrote, I think I wrote 20 or 25 tracks for that. They actually haven't been released yet. I'm so excited for people to actually hear that music that I worked on. But the game hasn't been released, so those specific tracks haven't been released yet. I think I have 1 or maybe 2 on my SoundCloud. You can follow me at Charles Wolf Composer. Yeah. And I don't know. I don't know exactly when that will be released. It's just still an ongoing process. Like I said, I'm working with independent developers a lot, so The rate is oftentimes it's like maybe one or two people working on these games, and sometimes it's part-time or even hobby. So how quickly things happen is really determined not by me at all. I just do my job as efficiently as I possibly can. Usually I have a standard 10-day business day turnaround, usually faster. If you tell me I need 10 tracks, and within 2 weeks I'll have 10 tracks for you. So that's never a problem on my end. It just depends on the developer and how long it takes to develop these things. It's complicated, and a lot of these people are writing games. Maybe they've done a couple, but the more ambitious you get, the longer things take.
This is true. Believe me, we have a lot of people from the indie game scene, especially they're on their first or second game. So this is a thing that comes up a lot. Believe me, if there's one thing I think we've learned by proxy, is that making video games is really hard. It's like everyone we've ever talked to in terms of actual, in like programming, just creating any aspect and every aspect of a game, sometimes they'll say it was so much harder than I thought it would be. I have never heard the answer, nah, this was good. This was easier. Never. And I expect that to never happen. Anyway, so what kind of music did you do for Boulder Mage here? Like, what tone is going to be invoked in this game?
So that is interesting. That's a unique kind of I would call it a halfway between SNES and more of a full, very cutting-edge cinematic orchestral score. That's a more of a I don't have a great title for it. I wish I did. It's orchestral. It's more modern. It's much better. It's better samples than I would say. Obviously than SNES. It's much more rich and realistic, but it's not. I would say it's not fully like the most authentic you can get sound. It's sort of a halfway, because that's in a wonderful sort of I would say kind of a retro art style, and so we wanted the music to be more modern, but not sounding 100% like as realistic as possible. I would probably liken it to some of the modern soundtracks to some of the, maybe not the most recent WoW stuff, maybe a couple seasons back. Some of that sort of music, maybe some of the more modern RuneScape. Just picking from stuff I know. It's like I said, if you're picking like a AAA title, something like some of the Assassin's Creed music, I would equate that to being more cinematic and more modern. Like Elden Ring just came out, everyone's been playing that. That has a very, very authentic, cutting-edge, modern sound.
Right.
So it's not quite that level. It's a little bit back. And that was on purpose, because we wanted it to still have a tinge of that sort of pixel art vibe to it, despite it being more realistic.
Mm-hmm.
That is definitely fantasy, by the way. It's fantasy orchestral is what I would define that in terms of genre.
Okay. Like Lord of the Rings and such?
Lord of the Rings and such. The direct inspiration actually came from film, and it was the composer Alexander Desplat. He's worked on a number of films. I'm trying to think of a title right now. The Grand Budapest Hotel. That soundtrack to that film was a direct inspiration to the music in Boulder Mage. So sometimes the inspiration doesn't necessarily have to come from a video game. It could be a film.
I don't remember that being a fantasy film, though. But
right, which it is. It's not a fantasy film, which is interesting. So it's the instrumentation that we pulled from that. It has a lot of plucky sounds. I'm using like mandolin. I use a charango, small guitar. I'm using a lot of like harp, a lot of kind of harpsichord. These kind of plucky sounding instruments that are kind of twangy and have a lot of that sort of aesthetic. And then like strings that are kind of churning along. You can take and blend genre pretty easily, and a lot of times people don't realize that instrumentation, the instruments you pick, really can define a sound. Like it really does. And so I think I know from talking to other composers that I know, when they're working on things like film, for example, they spend a lot of time like trying to pick out really interesting or unique, if they can, sounds and trying to make it unique through the instrumentation they're using. And so I think that's an area that of color and tone is what is being explored in a lot of modern films, especially stuff like by Zimmer, for example. He does that a lot. He does a lot of deep dive on that sort of thing.
All right. And when you do when you do music for one of these upcoming projects, is it an ongoing process, or do you do the music and you're done?
Right. That is up to the developer. So I often, oftentimes the developers, they know their own code the best. So the implementation into the game, I often, the developers want to do that, and that's kind of part of their process. So I do all of the music, and I'll write the original music. I will, get it so that the loops are ready to go to be implemented directly. I'll audio edit everything. I will go in sometimes if it's doing an adaptive style score where it's gonna be adaptive to the environment. We can use like another program like Fmod or Wwise, and then you can code those to handle stuff that it'll change in the moment and respond to certain triggers. But most of the time, I really handle the music end, and they handle the coding end because that's their strength and that's my strength. So the ongoing process of that depends on how much music they want to buy. So if they, for example, with Space Caterus, I worked on that project last year, and then this year he came back and asked for some more music because he had finished more of the game and wanted to flesh out a few more areas with music. So I went back in and started to write some new pieces and just finished another 10 tracks for him, I think. So yeah, it just depends on the individual developer. Some people, they just buy a certain amount and that's it. And some people will come back and ask for more if more is needed. Like I said, I'm a freelancer, so they just pay me for. Some people charge like by the hour and that sort of thing. I don't do that. How long it takes me is my problem, not yours. How I do it is I just charge by the duration of each track. So 30 seconds, a minute, minute and a half. How much music do you want? How long do you want each track to be? That's the price. It's all on my website. It's very easy to understand. And I try to make it as affordable as I possibly can for indie devs, while still maintaining that this is part of how I live. This is how I support myself, is partly through teaching privately lessons, music lessons, because, I'm a pianist, so teaching music is a good way to make some income, but also getting to do what I love, which is writing music and getting to collaborate, which is awesome.
Right. And I suppose in question, have you used your own piano skills to score some of the music here?
Absolutely. There was the recent project I worked on, very recent project, An Amazing Wizard, which is a roguelike Metrovania game. Fantastic artwork by Jacob Dabrowski0 on Twitter. That score is very, very much inspired it's a modern full orchestral cinematic score, and it has a lot of piano in it. It's piano with orchestra. And so when I'm all the piano stuff, I play every part on my keyboard into my computer system, into my DAW, and so via MIDI. And so I am playing in every part. So I'm often always using my piano skills just to write the music. That's my main instrument. I play a number of instruments, probably close to last count. I think it was like 20 to 30 instruments I can play. But a lot of them are percussion. So I played as a percussionist in college. So there's a lot of very similar instruments that are percussion. So it's cheating a bit to say that. But serious study, I've studied piano and guitar and cello. Those are my main three instruments that I really do play.
Okay. Now, in terms of writing video game music, does it? So I guess to break this down a bit, sometimes there is game music that has a distinct beginning and end, but there's also a lot of music from video games that's played calliope style.
Sure.
it's like like the Super Mario Brothers theme is a good example. That's not that may have a beginning, but it doesn't really have an end.
Right.
It loops upon itself endlessly until you like beat the stage, or you die or something like that. How do you handle writing music like that?
That's a great question. Most of the music I write is, I would say, is like Super Mario. That's a great example. I think of it in terms of sections. So in music, there's different forms that you can use in terms of structure. So like having sections in music. And so you'll have a section where you have a distinctive melody. You might have a section that is much less about the melody and much more about like the rhythm, like the way the notes are moving and how quickly they're moving. You might have a section that is much more chill after having a more intense section. It just depends on the piece, but I think of them in terms of sections. And then what you want to do, there's a couple of ways, is whatever the main scale. Not trying to be too technical here, but whatever the main scale you're using for the piece. So let's say you're writing a piece in, I don't know, A minor. So A is kind of the main note. That's kind of our home base note. You want to make sure that by the end of the track, you've kind of gotten back to that scale. You may go away from that using that scale and to use other scales, like nearby ones or even farther away ones. I don't know. But you kind of want to get back to that main scale by the end, or at least set up the return back to that main scale. And so the way I handle that is through my training, through the way I use harmony, so that when you get back to the beginning, it's seamless in that you prepared it for the listener. So when the return happens, it also sort of means that you have to leave the ending a little open-ended. Like the ending of the piece doesn't feel resolved, because you don't want it to feel resolved. You want it to feel like it needs to go on. So that when you go back to the top of the track, when it loops, you're like, we've arrived back. I know this. This is familiar. Okay, we're safe. We're good. Everything's good. Everyone can go home now. We're good. We're back to home, right? We're back to where we started, if that makes sense.
Okay. That is an interesting way to approach things.
Yeah.
And anyway, I suppose moving necessarily forward, but to another project, another recent video game is Paladin's Oath.
Oh yes,
which is a digital.
That's been released, so I'm excited to say that this just got released like this week. So you can go right now on Steam and check it out. Paladin's Oath is by the amazing dev Fire Biscuit Game. He's a developer who lives in Singapore, so it's an example of I get to work with people from all over the world. And it's an amazing thing to do that. And so Fire Biscuit Game, he created this wonderful like digital card game that has board game elements to it. It's inspired by games like Gloomhaven, Mage Knight. These are board games, physical board games that are very popular. And he created this digital sort of, I would call it his version of it, his take on the genre. And it's a modern orchestral fantasy RPG style music, very big, sweeping, has a really dramatic sort of soundtrack. You can listen to the actual soundtrack is available for free. There's 5 or 6 tracks to it. And you can go and listen to and download right now on his Steam. You can download the soundtrack for free and listen to the whole thing if you want. You can also check it out my SoundCloud. It's on there as well as on my website. And it's really, really cool that that it was really fun to put together. The inspiration for this particular soundtrack sort of came from some of the World of Warcraft music. It came from some of the classical music that I know, specifically the music of Dvorak. It's a big inspiration. Antonin Dvorak, a Czechoslovakian composer from the middle 1800s, and others. So when I approached this track, he asked for 4 different things. He asked for some success music, some failure music. He asked for some battle music and some exploration music. So that's pretty typical of most sort of exploration fantasy-based games. And he wanted the music to be pretty heroic and pretty epic, and to really carry a lot of energy. because it's a card game. So the rate of play is very variable because they have to read the cards. What do they do? And then pick the card you want, and then combo it with other cards. It's very sort of Magic the Gathering that way, I guess. And so the music needed to have a lot of energy to keep the excitement going, despite the fact that maybe there wasn't always a lot happening in terms of it being sort of a digital board game.
And
so that was the challenge.
How did you? And is that how you overcame the challenge?
I think so. I think it works really well. These were very long tracks. These were orchestral tracks, and most of them are 3 to 4 minutes long. So these were much bigger pieces to write, which was a lot of fun for me. And it features a lot of horns, a lot of brass, a lot of strings, and it was an interesting challenge to keep the energy going throughout such a long duration, right? And I'm glad it turned out really well.
Well, that's good. Alex, you're our board game guy, or the closest thing we have to that. Are there any questions you want to ask about this thing?
No, I think I'm actually pretty much good. I was just listening about the music stuff mostly.
Okay. Let's see. I think we got another one here. Awakening the Light.
Awakening the Light. Yeah, that was a cool project. I didn't do a lot on that project. That was just a couple of tracks by Parents in Gaming too. I'm not sure the current state of that game, to be honest. The developer hasn't been as active on Twitter lately. Either they're deep in development or maybe something else came up. I'm not sure. But that was I had to write some boss battle music, sort of in a hybrid orchestral. So using sort of a lot of synthesizers as well as orchestral instruments. So if you kind of think of like the retro chiptune stuff was like I said earlier, 6 to 8 instruments. And then you go to orchestral, and that's like 30. Hybrid orchestral pushes that up to somewhere in the range. It can be up 50 to 100 tracks. It can get really large. I don't tend to go that big with it. I'll keep it in the 30 to 50 range. But you're adding in lots of these kind of really. It can be a really aggressive synthesizers. It can be less. It can be a lot of atmospheric things, a lot of textural things where it's sort of like wind noises or rumbling noises like thunder. And then you can process that and then add a bunch of effects like distortion or delay or other things like that where you are manipulating the sound. And from there forward, you can build it out. And so it's these kind of massive, heavy, dense, sort of big orchestral stuff, and so it has that. It's what you hear in a lot of them. I would just keep using the same example, but it's a good example. Like the recent soundtrack to say Dune, or maybe the work of Junkie XL in Mad Max. That's a good example of that style. It's lots and lots of layers that are really densely packed on top of each other, and lots of doubling of musical lines, and you'll have a ton of instruments. And it's very heavy and very, very weighty sounding. It's very big. It's as big as you can get, and that's because I want it's epic over-the-top action on the screen. You want to support that with epic over-the-top music in terms of as well. So it kind of goes with the genre. So Dune, big action film, sci-fi. Mad Max, same deal, dystopian. So you need those big over-the-top sounds. And that's how you get there, is with these giant synthesized sounds of extra bass and other chirpy effects. I'm thinking of the recent Christopher Nolan film Tenet. That was the soundtrack is amazing. I'm blanking right now on the composer's name, unfortunately, but that's another example of that style. And so the developer is another example of them looking to film to inspire the music. Was looking for the boss battle music to have that hybrid orchestral big sound, and that's what I wrote. And it was a really interesting thing, because when I started, he had initially asked for a very distinctive melody to be played to kind of give it some shape, and then as we were developing it further, we quickly realized that having the melodic content in that style just wasn't working. It just didn't fit for the level of intensity and action. So we ended up going with not having a distinctive melody, but just having a lot of like dense textures instead. And that was a kind of a new process. A lot of games that I work on, they want it to be, distinctive and sort of Mario-like in that you can sing the melody. In this, the goal was not to do that at all. It was just to provide like just raw energy.
How much raw energy?
A pretty good amount, I think.
Okay. And I guess shifting focus a bit here, is there any perceivable difference when you do a actual soundtrack versus just a contribution of like one or two tracks?
Is there a perceivable difference? I think the more music you can put into your games as developers, I think the better the game is, because anything that you play over and over eventually will get boring, if I'm being really honest. So the bigger your soundtrack, the more varied you have the music for the different sections of the game, for the different areas, even varying the music within an area, and really take a game from one level to a whole new level. And so, like I said, I'm a freelancer, so I just do what I'm paid for. So if someone asks for, 4 tracks for a game or 5 tracks, and then they're gonna supply the rest with other music or other material or whatever, that's for them to decide, and that's their approach. That's cool. I just like I said, I just charge by the track. So however much music they want to buy from me, that's great. But I find that the ones where they're willing to invest a little bit more resources into and purchase a greater number of tracks instead of working on, say, just like 4 or 5. If you can buy maybe 30, then you can really get a much more fleshed out music world for your game, and you can take the game to a whole new level. But like I said, I totally understand that budget, and for a lot of these people, it's sort of their fun side project. That's a real consideration, and whatever you can do, I totally understand. So there's no judgment from me if you just buy a couple or if you buy a lot. It's up to the person, really. And I just do the best job I can, as best I can, as accurately as I can, as quickly, but still maintaining a good quality as I can to deliver my end of things. And then how they put the music to use is sort of up to them.
Okay, or
I think that there's a difference. Yeah, I think having more is better.
Right, but I suppose, let me rephrase here. It's more not necessarily having a small amount of songs. It's more like, I think you mentioned the pesticide game here. You provided a couple of tracks, but that was a soundtrack made of many artists. Like,
yeah, there's more than one composer contributed to that. That's correct.
Yes,
I don't know. That's up to the developer how they wanted to release. That project was for a friend of mine, so and it was I was happy to provide a little bit of music and for him, and so it was a collaborative effort. And so because it was in a sort of jukebox metal style, he wanted a bunch of different composers to contribute, because then you'd have a more authentically sounding like it was a bunch of different bands who had built out the music for this game while you're running around. And that's an action shooter game. You're running around and you're fighting a bunch of giant spiders, and you're shooting them and they're exploding, and it's the kind of the classic kind of pulpy, almost like Gary's Mod sort of thing, right? And that I think that's sort of what his approach was. And so the whole concept for that soundtrack, for my end, was just 1 or 2 tracks. For his end, it was a bigger thing, because he was having more people contribute than just even me, which is, again, that is totally cool. And I thought it was a really neat project, and I was glad I could be part of it.
Okay, fair enough. I suppose another question is, are there any genres of music that you don't feel comfortable working in?
There's only a few that I would say that are not sort of things that I would attempt. I can write if I can hear the music, and I can really invest some time into listening deeply to the music because of my background, my training musically. I studied music in college for 7 years, so I spent a lot of time listening to music, analyzing music, writing about music, writing music. I feel like most genres I can really handle. The only thing I don't really do is vocals. I can do choirs, of course, and I can do some solo vocal stuff. But I'm not a singer. I'm a pianist, so I don't tend to do like. If you're looking for like a pop singer-songwriter person, or even an indie singer-songwriter person, I'm not that kind of composer. I write mostly instrumental music for instruments. There might be choir in it, and that's totally cool. But I don't do I'm not a lyricist. I don't write lyrics to songs and have me singing on tracks. I don't really do that. So there's been a couple of people who wanted like some hyper pop music, for example. And that's just not a genre that I work in because I don't really work with actual vocals. The biggest problem with working with vocals is that is like the easiest thing to copyright. It's like the easiest thing. And so if you're not creating your own vocals, which is that I'm not really a singer, if you're using other people's samples of their voice, even if you buy it legitly, a lot of times people will make their own tracks and then throw it up on YouTube or whatever, and then they'll like copyright it or whatnot, and then that can run into a lot of problems. So I tend to avoid non-instrumental genres for the most part because of that can cause a lot of copyright issues. And it's not right, and the whole system of YouTube is kind of messed up. But not going into that too deeply, I'll just say if I have to sing on the track, it's not happening. I'm sorry. Find someone else who's willing to do that.
Okay.
But
fair enough.
Most instrumental genres, if you give me time and I focus on it, I can absolutely do it. Actually, using this, if I can segue really quickly,
Go ahead.
I know it's a little slightly off topic because it's not video game specific, but I did work on a comic book. I mentioned that at the beginning, and I would love to just quickly talk about that just a second because that was a great example of. I wrote a full soundtrack for that, and by that I mean a full suite of orchestral music. It was 20 plus minutes of orchestral music, and it goes along with the book. And so as you're reading the American Dreams comic by Daniel Kalbin, an author I've collaborated now more than once with. I actually have a new project I can't talk about, but I'll just put it out there. There's a new project in the works, guys. Get hyped. It's going to be great. But put that aside, I worked on last year American Dreams, and it's a superhero set early 1900s. He gets these superpowers. There's Cthulhu elements. It's a really cool comic book. And in that, I had to write a whole suite that was sort of in a golden age of Hollywood style. And it was sort of inspired partly by some of this is later than Golden Age, but by the work of John Williams. That was one of the inspiration points, but also by the work of the early American composer. I'm going to blank on it, of course, because I always do that, but give me 1 second to think about this. The Korngold, Eric Korngold, the early 1940s, 1930s composer. And I listened to a lot of his music to directly write that track. So that's an example of writing orchestral music that's not like modern cinematic. That's actually an older style. It's a sweeping Hollywood sound. So yes, I do have to sometimes go and branch out into other genres and subgenres, and I'm always excited to do that.
Another question I had about this particular the vocals thing is, does that apply to acapella as well?
Acapella, that I can get around. To a certain point, yes, I probably would apply it to that as well. If it's just like, again, if it's something that I can play on my keyboard and have a choir sing it, that's fine. Or have like a solo vocalist that I have that's like a pre-recorded thing, and I can put that in. That's fine. But I don't generally get asked to do a lot of stuff with vocals, and so that's something that I just haven't gotten into. And again, the copyright thing is a big deal, and I want all the music I write is my music, and it's original, and you won't have issues with copyright because I'm actually writing it. But when it comes to vocals, things can get kind of weird, especially with things like YouTube.
Right. Well, I mean, have you had a problem with your music appearing on YouTube unauthorized?
Yeah, never have had that problem up to this point. I will. That might change in the future. Hopefully, get big enough, and that's not a. I don't take that as a sign of. While it's a problem, I don't think of that as necessarily a bad thing. It just means you've sort of made it. If someone's like pirating your work, that means something. So it's sort of like for me, it's that first negative comment on a YouTube video. That's not a bad thing. That just means you've made it. Does that make sense?
It does.
A weird way to look at it, but that's sort of how I think about it.
It perhaps depends on the context.
Sure.
Like, because music appearing on YouTube has a lot of context. Like like some people might use it as a soundtrack to their video, for example, or they'll just throw the track up on a channel and run ads in front of it, which is
that's more of a problem, I would say. The thing, all of the developers who buy music from me are totally cool to use it for their own advertisement on social media, and that's part of my standard music contract. So that is totally legit and totally cool. I also use the music for my own promotion on Twitter and on my website and SoundCloud and stuff. And so that's totally cool. Like I said, I haven't run into any problems yet, and I'm hoping that I won't have to have that problem. Like I said, but I try not to. That's the sort of thing that I think if you think about it too much, you can stay up at night, and you don't want to get into that headspace. So I'll just leave it there for now.
Okay. Right. I'll see if my colleagues here have any further questions for you at this juncture.
Sure.
I think I'm good.
Betty?
Sorry, I think I'm good.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to extend an invitation to you to appear on our other show, Moonhawk Studios Presents, on April 13th. That's where we can, branch out from the video game talk and talk about all your projects. And we got some people who are more musically inclined on that program, so they could probably ask questions that we can't.
Sure.
So does that sound like a thing you want to do?
Yeah, perhaps. Let's talk about it and look at schedules and see if we make that happen. That'd be cool.
All right. But in the meantime, where can people find your music?
Absolutely. There's two main places to find my music. That's going to be the easiest. One is just my website. It's just charleswolfmusic.com. Again, that's Charles Wolf, like the animal, music.com. And then you can find me on, of course, SoundCloud. My portfolio is up there. You can find that at soundcloud.com/CharlesWolfComposer. And that's where I'm at there. And then, of course, on Twitter, I'm always posting music, as well as I like to host share threads for indie devs. If you're a game developer of any kind, or you're an artist or whatever, come share your work on my threads. I host up for Screenshot Saturday as well as Wishlist Wednesday each and every week, and I retweet pretty much most of what people share. I'd like to boost people as best and support them as best I can. So that's something that I'm very active on Twitter. So you can follow me on Twitter at CWolfMusic, and those are the three main places people can find my stuff. I'm always looking for new projects, so hit me up, send me a message on Twitter or email me, and I would love to talk to you about your game.
All right. So yeah, that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to join us on Sunday for our typical review session. And until then, I shall wish you good gaming.